Do you love me? Or do you love my money? The question hung in the air between us. Sophia barely looked up from the velvet jewelry box in her hands. Instead, she smiled at the diamond bracelet sparkling beneath the restaurant lights. It's beautiful. She slipped it onto her wrist, turned it once, admired the way it caught the light, then leaned across the table and kissed my cheek. Thank you. Not, I love you. Not, how was your trip? Not even, I missed you. Just, thank you for the bracelet, for the lifestyle, for the life she believed would never end. Around us, the finest restaurant in Manhattan buzzed with quiet conversations. Waiters poured vintage wine. A pianist played softly near the windows overlooking Central Park. Everything looked perfect, exactly the kind of evening magazines loved photographing. I had spent years building a life people envied. A technology company valued at billions. Private jets, luxury homes, magazine covers, investment conferences, awards, success. Yet sitting across from the woman I dated for nearly 2 years, I had never felt more alone. I just got back from Singapore, I said quietly. She nodded absent-mindedly, still studying the bracelet. I know. I saw your pictures. You never asked how the trip went. We can talk about that later. She smiled. I want to try the bracelet with my black dress. That was my answer, not spoken. Understood. I looked through the restaurant window. People hurried along Fifth Avenue beneath the evening lights. Some carried shopping bags. Others hurried home after work. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared. For the first time in years, that sounded peaceful. My name is Adam Collins. At 42, financial magazines regularly called me one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. People assumed money solved loneliness. They're wrong. Money attracts attention. It attracts admiration. It attracts opportunity. Sometimes. Now, it even attracts affection. But it cannot tell you whether any of those things are real. The following morning, my executive team gathered inside the boardroom overlooking downtown Manhattan. Quarterly profits had exceeded expectations. Another acquisition had closed. Shareholders were thrilled. Applause filled the room. I listened politely, then closed the presentation. I'm taking a leave of absence. Silence. My chief financial officer blinked. For how long? I don't know, the head of security frowned. Is this related to a medical issue? No. Family emergency? No. Then why? I stood and walked toward the windows. Because somewhere along the way, I forgot what an honest conversation feels like. No one answered. How could they? They worked for me. Even disagreement came wrapped in politeness. After the meeting, my longtime attorney, Victor Hayes, caught up with me. You can't disappear. I can. You run one of the largest companies in the country. I've hired people capable of running it. He lowered his voice. Where are you going? I smiled. If I tell you, you'll send security. Probably. Exactly, he sighed. You realize this is dangerous. I know. You could be recognized. Then I'll go somewhere nobody expects. That afternoon, I drove out of Manhattan alone. No driver, no assistance, no security convoy. 2 hours later, I parked beside a quiet highway leading toward a small farming community. I removed my tailored jacket, changed into old jeans and a faded sweatshirt I'd bought at a thrift store weeks earlier, covered my expensive watch, left my wallet locked inside the trunk. For the first time in nearly 20 years, I carried almost nothing. No company phone, no business cards, no title, no reputation. Only one small backpack, and a question I couldn't stop asking myself. If nobody knew I was Adam Collins, would anyone still care whether I existed? By late afternoon, the weather turned colder. Cars passed without slowing. Families drove home from work. Nobody noticed the tired-looking stranger sitting beside the road. I wasn't acting. After hours without food, without conversation, without anyone making eye contact, the loneliness became surprisingly real. I quietly laughed to myself. 48 hours earlier, people had waited months for 10 minutes of my time. Now, that they wouldn't spare 2 seconds to look in my direction. A silver SUV slowed briefly. Hope rose, then disappeared as it drove away. Another truck passed, then another. I lowered my head. Maybe this entire experiment had been foolish. Maybe loneliness wasn't something you could understand in a day. Maybe I'd underestimated how invisible struggling people really became. "Sir?" A small voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up. A little girl stood only a few feet away. She couldn't have been older than 10. She wore a worn blue school backpack, nearly as big as she was. "You okay?" she asked softly. I smiled. "I've had better days." She opened her lunch bag, looked inside. There was one sandwich, an apple, and a small juice box. Without hesitation, she handed me the sandwich. "I don't have much," she said. "But you look hungrier than I am." I stared at the sandwich. No cameras, no reporters, no audience. Just a little girl quietly giving away half of what she had. "What if your parents get upset?" She shrugged. "My dad says, kindness is the only thing that gets bigger after you give it away." For reasons I couldn't explain, my eyes began to sting. In boardrooms, people negotiated billion-dollar contracts. On the side of an empty country road, a child had just given away something infinitely more valuable, without expecting anything in return. "What's your name?" I asked. "Lucy," she smiled. "What's yours?" For a moment, I almost answered automatically. Adam Collins, CEO, billionaire. Instead, I simply said, "I'm Adam," nothing more. She grinned. "Nice to meet you, Adam." Then she looked toward the small farmhouse across the road. "My dad's waiting." She started walking away, stopped, turned back. "You shouldn't stay out here tonight. I'll figure something out." She thought about that for a second, then nodded to herself. "I think Dad's going to want to meet you." Dad's going to want to meet you." Before I could answer, Lucy had already run across the quiet country road. She stopped halfway, turned around, and waved enthusiastically. "Come on." I hesitated. For the first time since leaving New York, I wasn't worried about being recognized. I was worried about accepting kindness I hadn't earned. The farmhouse sat at the edge of a small vegetable field. It wasn't large. The white paint had faded from years of sun. The wooden porch creaked beneath every step. A rusted pickup truck rested beside an old red barn. Nothing about the place suggested wealth. Everything about it suggested home. A middle-aged man stepped out onto the porch, drying his hands on a work towel. He looked first at Lucy, then at me. He found someone. Lucy nodded excitedly. "Dad." "This is Adam. He hasn't eaten." The man looked directly into my eyes. Not at my clothes, not at my worn backpack, just in my eyes. "You hungry, son?" I smiled faintly. More than I'd like to admit. He opened the front door. "Then standing out here won't fix it. Come inside." The smell of homemade soup filled the house. Fresh bread cooled beside the kitchen window. Everything felt warm, simple, real. Lucy immediately placed another bowl on the table. "I'll get another spoon." Her father extended his hand. "I'm George Parker." "Adam." We shook hands. His grip was firm, honest. No hesitation, no suspicion, no questions about where I came from, or why I looked the way I did. Halfway through dinner, George finally asked, "So, what happened?" I looked down at the bowl. I lost a lot. It wasn't exactly a lie, just not the whole truth. He nodded once. I've been there. No interrogation, no demand for details, just understanding. Sometimes, the kindest people know not to force someone to relive their worst day. After dinner, George carried my empty bowl to the sink. "You can stay here." I looked around the small house. I couldn't impose. He laughed softly. "You're not. The spare room's been empty since Lucy's grandfather passed. It's better someone uses it." Lucy clapped happily. "I'll go get fresh blankets." Before I could refuse again, she had already disappeared down the hallway. George smiled. "You're outnumbered." For the first time in months, I laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite kind reserved for investors and board members. The spare bedroom was tiny. A wooden bed, an old quilt, a reading lamp. One family photograph hanging above the dresser. That was all. Yet somehow, it felt more peaceful than my penthouse overlooking Central Park. I sat on the edge of the bed. The silence wasn't empty. It was comforting. No ringing phones, no financial news, no assistants knocking on the door. Only the sound of crickets outside the window. I whispered to myself, "So this is what peace feels like." The next morning, I woke before sunrise. George was already outside loading baskets of vegetables into the pickup truck. Tomatoes, corn, lettuce, peppers. Lucy helped stack wooden crates almost bigger than she was. "You should have woken me," I said. George smiled. "You looked like someone who hadn't slept well in a long time." I wanted to. I know. He handed me a pair of work gloves. "If you really want to help, carry those crates." An hour later, we arrived at the local farmer's market. It couldn't have been more different from Manhattan. No luxury storefronts, no polished marble, just rows of family-owned stalls, fresh produce, homemade pies, people greeting each other by first name. George introduced me simply. "This is Adam. He's helping us out for a while." No one asked for a resume. No one cared where I'd come from. They simply handed me boxes to unload. "Your tomatoes look amazing today." An elderly customer smiled. George chuckled. "Lucy says that's because she sings to them." Lucy giggled. "I do." The woman bought 3 baskets. Before leaving, she quietly slipped an extra $5 into Lucy's tip jar. "Keep singing." Everyone laughed. I found myself smiling again. Around noon, the mood shifted. A sleek black sports car stopped beside the market. Heads turned immediately. A tall man stepped out, wearing an expensive designer jacket and sunglasses. He walked confidently toward the Parker family stand. He wasn't looking at the vegetables. He was looking at someone behind me. "Emma." A young woman straightened from arranging fresh flowers beside the neighboring stall. She couldn't have been older than 30. Simple jeans, work boots, hair tied back, no expensive jewelry, no designer handbag. Yet somehow, she drew every eye around her. She smiled politely. "Morning, Brian." "I've told you before. You don't need to keep coming." Brian ignored her. Instead, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I've got something for you." Emma didn't even glance at it. "I already know what's inside. So save yourself the speech." People nearby quietly stopped working. Apparently, this wasn't the first time. Brian opened the box anyway. A diamond ring sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. "Marry me," he said confidently. "I can give you everything." Emma folded her arms. "You've asked before. I'm asking again." "My answer hasn't changed." Brian frowned. Why? You deserve more than this place. Emma looked around the market. At George laughing with customers. At Lucy chasing a butterfly between the produce stands. At neighbors helping each other carry heavy boxes. Then she looked back at Brian. I already have everything that matters. You just don't know how to measure it. Brian's smile vanished. So, you're choosing this life? I'm choosing peace, she answered. Not money. Without another word, she turned away and continued arranging flowers. Brian stood there for several seconds, humiliated in front of half the market. Then he glanced toward me. His eyes narrowed, as if noticing me for the first time. And somehow, I had the strange feeling our paths were about to cross much sooner than either of us expected. Our paths were about to cross much sooner than either of us expected. Brian didn't get back into his sports car immediately. Instead, he stood there watching me, not casually, carefully, like someone trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, he walked toward our vegetable stand. George greeted him politely. Afternoon. Brian ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on me. I haven't seen you around before. I just got here, I answered. You family? George spoke before I could. He's staying with us for a little while. Brian looked me up and down. Old jeans, worn boots, a faded backpack resting beneath the table. He smirked. So, you're looking for work? I'm looking for a fresh start. Brian laughed quietly. Good luck finding that around here. Without another word, he climbed back into his car and drove away. But before disappearing around the corner, he looked once more toward Emma. The rejection had bruised his ego, and men like Brian rarely accepted rejection gracefully. Emma walked over a few minutes later, carrying a basket of fresh strawberries. For Lucy, she smiled. She helped me last week. George laughed. She'll say you spoil her. Emma shrugged. Kids deserve strawberries. Lucy hugged the basket like treasure. Thank you. Then she ran off to show another little girl. Emma finally looked at me. You must be Adam. I've heard about you. I smiled. I hope only good things. She glanced toward George. My dad doesn't invite strangers home. If he trusted you, well, that's enough for me. There wasn't a trace of suspicion in her voice, only warmth, simple, honest. It caught me off guard. I'm Emma. She extended her hand. Her handshake was firm. Nothing like the rehearsed greetings I'd exchanged with executives for years. No hidden agenda. No calculation. Just, nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you too, I answered. For reasons I couldn't explain, I meant it. Over the following week, the market became my routine. Wake before sunrise, load vegetables, help customers, repair fences, feed chickens, carry heavy boxes. By evening, I was exhausted in a way I'd almost forgotten existed. Not mentally, physically. The kind of exhaustion that lets you sleep peacefully. George never treated me like a guest. He treated me like family. If there was work to do, we all did it together. One afternoon, Emma stopped by carrying fresh bread she'd baked that morning. Lucy immediately stole the first slice. George pretended to be offended. I thought that was for me. You were too slow, Lucy laughed. Emma shook her head. I swear. Oh, she negotiates better than most adults. Everyone laughed, including me. The sound felt strangely unfamiliar. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten what laughter sounded like when nobody expected anything from me. Later that afternoon, Emma and I walked toward the creek behind the farm carrying empty baskets. The water reflected the late afternoon sun. Birds skimmed quietly across the surface. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she broke the silence. You don't talk much about your past. I smiled. There's not much worth talking about. I don't believe that. She answered gently. Everyone has a story. I've made mistakes. So has everyone. She picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. What matters, and is whether you learned from them. Her words lingered with me long after the ripples disappeared. That evening, George and I played chess on the front porch. Lucy sat nearby, drawing pictures with colored pencils. You've trapped my queen again, I laughed. George smiled proudly. You keep thinking 5 moves ahead. I only think 1. He moved another piece. And that's why you keep losing, Lucy giggled. I think Grandpa would have liked you. George looked toward the empty rocking chair beside him. So do I. For a brief second, none of us spoke. Some silences hurt. Others felt like belonging. The peace didn't last. The next morning, Brian returned. This time, he wasn't carrying flowers or a ring. He walked directly toward Emma while customers filled the market. Can we talk? I've already answered every question you've asked, she replied calmly. I just don't understand. You've got opportunities here that most people dream about. Emma continued arranging tomatoes. And you've got everything money can buy. So why isn't that enough? Brian's jaw tightened. He pointed toward me. Is this about him? She looked over at me briefly, then back at Brian. It's about character. He doesn't even have a job. He works, she answered immediately. He helps my family every day. Brian laughed sarcastically. Helping unload vegetables? That's your standard now? Emma's expression hardened. My standard is kindness. The entire market grew noticeably quieter. Customers pretended to keep shopping. Everyone was listening. Brian stepped closer. You really think this guy can build a future with you? Emma didn't hesitate. I'd rather build a small life with a good man than a mansion with someone who only loves himself. A few nearby vendors exchanged glances. Brian's face flushed with embarrassment. He wasn't used to hearing no, especially in public. He pointed toward me. You don't even know who this guy really is. Emma looked directly into his eyes. Neither do you. Brian turned and walked away, but this time, he wasn't angry. He was thinking. Watching him leave, I felt something tighten in my chest. Power rarely gives up quietly. Humiliation almost always demands revenge. And somehow, I knew Brian wasn't finished. Not with Emma. Not with me. That night, as everyone slept, Brian sat alone inside his office. He slid a business card across the desk toward a private investigator. I want everything, he said coldly. His name, his past, and whatever he's hiding. The investigator nodded once. Give me 48 hours. Brian smiled. I have a feeling our homeless friend isn't nearly as ordinary as he wants everyone to believe. I have a feeling. Yeah, our homeless friend isn't nearly as ordinary as he wants everyone to believe. The private investigator nodded once. I'll start tonight. Brian leaned back in his chair. I don't care how much it costs. I want everything. Where he came from, what he's hiding, and why he suddenly appeared next to Emma. 48 hours passed. Life on the Parker farm continued as though nothing had changed. Before sunrise, George and I harvested tomatoes. Lucy chased chickens around the yard until Emma laughed so hard she nearly dropped a basket of flowers. For the first time in years, I stopped checking stock prices, stopped thinking about board meetings, stopped wondering what investors expected from me. Instead, I worried about rain, about crops, about whether Lucy would beat me at checkers again after dinner. It was a simpler life. Somehow, it felt richer. Emma and I spent more time together without either of us planning it. Sometimes she helped George sort vegetables. Sometimes I carried flour buckets to her stand before the market opened. Neither of us called them dates, but everyone else seemed to. One afternoon, Lucy whispered loudly enough for both of us to hear, "You two smile differently around each other." Emma laughed. "So observant." Lucy folded her arms proudly. "I'm always observant." George chuckled from across the barn. "She's right." Emma's cheeks turned slightly pink. Mine probably did too. That evening, Emma and I sat on the old wooden fence overlooking the fields. The sky glowed orange as the sun disappeared behind the hills. "I used to think," I said quietly, "success meant always chasing something bigger." "And now?" she asked. I looked across the farm. George repairing a fence, Lucy running after fireflies, neighbors waving as they drove home. Now I think peace might actually be success. Emma smiled. I've believed that my whole life. She turned toward me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. What scares you?" The question caught me off guard. Boardrooms never asked questions like that. They asked about projections, growth, risk, not fear. I looked away. Losing people. I admitted. The people who matter most. Emma nodded slowly. "I think everyone's afraid of that." Then she added quietly, "But the only way to keep people is to let them know who you really are." Her words landed harder than she realized, because she had unknowingly described the one thing I still hadn't done. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone on the front porch. My phone, the one I'd kept hidden and switched off for weeks, rested in my hands. One call. That's all it would take. I could return to New York tomorrow. Everything would go back to normal. The company, the meetings, the headlines. Instead, I turned the phone off again. For the first time, I wasn't ready to leave. Not because of the farm, because of Emma. The following afternoon, Brian's investigator returned. He placed a thick envelope on Brian's desk. "I found him." Brian opened the file. The first page contained a photograph. Adam Collins, Chief Executive Officer, Collins Technologies. Estimated net worth, several $billion. Brian stared at the page in disbelief. "You're kidding." "I'm not." The investigator slid over another photograph. Magazine covers, business awards, television interviews, private aircraft, luxury homes. Brian slowly smiled. Then, he laughed. Not because he was amused, because he had just found the weapon he'd been looking for. So, the homeless man, he is actually a billionaire. Meanwhile, the annual Harvest Festival transformed the town square into a celebration. Children played carnival games. Local bands performed on a small wooden stage. Food trucks lined the streets. Neighbors greeted one another like family. George grilled hamburgers. Lucy insisted I help her run the beanbag toss. Emma sold bouquets decorated with autumn ribbons. It felt like the entire town had gathered in one place. As the sun began to set, Emma walked over carrying 2 cups of hot cider. She handed one to me. "You've become part of this place," she said softly. "I don't know how that happened." "I think I do," she smiled. "You stopped trying to impress people." I laughed quietly. I've spent most of my life doing exactly that. Then maybe you're finally becoming yourself. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The music drifted through the evening air. Children laughed somewhere behind us. Emma looked into my eyes. "I really like being with you. My heart pounded. So do I. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Without thinking, and I reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with mine. For the first time since leaving Manhattan, I felt something I couldn't buy. Hope. Across the square, Brian watched everything from inside his parked car. He saw Emma holding my hand. He saw us laughing together. His expression darkened. He opened the investigation file again, then slowly removed the first page. Tomorrow, the entire town would know exactly who Adam Collins really was, and Brian intended to make sure. Emma learned the truth from everyone except me. Tomorrow, the entire town would know who Adam Collins really was. Brian made sure of it. By sunrise, rumors spread through the market faster than fresh coffee. Did you hear? They say that homeless man is some billionaire. No way. I saw his picture online. It looks exactly like him. Vendors stopped arranging vegetables. Customers whispered between stalls. Every conversation seemed to end with the same question. If it's true, why would he lie? I arrived at the market, carrying 2 crates of tomatoes. The usual smiles were gone. People still greeted me, but differently. Curiosity had replaced warmth. George noticed immediately. Something's wrong, before I could answer. Lucy came running toward us. Dad! Everyone's talking about Adam. George frowned. What are they saying? Lucy hesitated. They're saying he's actually a billionaire. Silence. George slowly turned toward me. He didn't look angry, only hurt. Adam, he said quietly. Is it true? I looked at the little farmhouse across the road, at the fields we'd harvested together, at the family who had treated me like one of their own. Then back at George. Yes. The single words seemed to drain every sound from the market. You own Collins Technologies? Yes. So, you were never homeless. I chose to leave everything behind. George nodded slowly. But you still let us believe you had nowhere else to go. I did. He closed his eyes for a moment. I wish you'd trusted us enough to tell us. Those words hurt more than any accusation ever could. Before I could answer, Emma appeared. She'd obviously heard the rumors too. She walked straight toward me. No hesitation, no tears, just questions. Tell me, she said quietly. Please. Is it true? I nodded. It is. She searched my face. As in, billions of dollars? Yes. You've known who you were this entire time. Yes. Her voice became almost a whisper. So, every conversation, every meal. No, every day we've spent together. You were hiding the biggest truth of your life. I never lied about how I felt, I answered. But you lied about who you were, she replied immediately. And she was right. I wasn't trying to manipulate you. I was trying to understand if anyone could love me without my money. Emma looked away. You should have asked for honesty. Instead of testing people. I know. I understand why you did it, she said softly. But understanding it, no, doesn't make it hurt less. For the first time since leaving New York, I wished I could trade every dollar I'd ever earned for one chance to undo that mistake. George stepped between us. Emma, give yourself time. She nodded, then looked back at me one last time. I need some space. I'll wait, I answered quietly, as long as it takes. She walked away. Lucy started after her, then stopped. She looked back at me. "I still like you," she whispered. "But, I wish you'd told us." Then she followed Emma, standing alone in the middle of the market. I realized something. I'd gone searching for real love. Instead, I'd broken the trust of the only people who had ever offered it freely. That evening, I packed my backpack. George found me folding the old blanket Lucy had given me. "Leaving? I think I should." He sat beside me on the porch. "For whose sake?" "I've caused enough pain." George remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "You know what disappoints me most?" I shook my head. "It isn't that you're rich. It isn't even that you hid it. It's that you decided for us how much truth we deserved." His words hit harder than anything Emma had said, because they were true. The next morning, I rented a small room at the only motel outside town, not because I wanted comfort, because I wanted to respect Emma's wishes. Days passed. I never called, never showed up unexpectedly, never asked anyone to convince her to forgive me. Instead, I quietly looked for ways to help. When George's tractor broke down, the repair bill was mysteriously paid before he reached the mechanic. When the local food pantry ran low on supplies, an anonymous delivery arrived before opening. When the elementary school needed new computers, a donation appeared under the name "A Friend." No interviews, no press releases, no headlines, just help. The way it always should have been. Brian watched everything with growing frustration. Emma still refused to see him. George still ignored him. And somehow, even after the truth came out, people weren't turning against me. "They're actually starting to respect him," he muttered. His private investigator nodded. "He's keeping his distance. Helping people quietly." Brian slammed his hand onto the desk. "Then we make sure he can't come back." He reached for his phone. "I've got another job for you." "What kind of job?" Brian's eyes turned cold. "One that scares that family enough to make them leave this town forever." The investigator hesitated. Brian slid a thick envelope full of cash across the table. "I don't want Adam dead," he said. "I just want him gone." The investigator slowly picked up the envelope. "Consider it done." That same night, while the Parker family slept peacefully, two unfamiliar trucks rolled quietly onto the dirt road leading toward their farm. Two unfamiliar trucks rolled quietly onto the dirt road leading toward the Parker farm. Their headlights stayed off. The engines barely made a sound. 3 men climbed out carrying gasoline cans. One pointed toward the old red barn. "Make it quick. No one gets hurt. We're only sending a message." Within seconds, gasoline splashed across the dry wooden walls. A match struck. The flame caught instantly. "Fire!" Lucy's terrified scream shattered the silence. George rushed onto the porch. The entire barn was already burning. Orange flames climbed toward the roof. Smoke poured into the night sky. Neighbors came running with buckets. Someone called 911. Another shouted for everyone to stay back. Then Lucy screamed again. "Dad! Our horses!" George froze. "They're still inside." Before anyone could stop him, he ran toward the burning barn. The roof groaned loudly above him. At that exact moment, the headlights appeared at the end of the road. I had been driving back from town after leaving another anonymous delivery at the food pantry. The moment I saw the smoke, I slammed on the brakes. "George!" He turned. "The horses! They're trapped!" Without thinking, I pulled off my jacket, wrapped it around my face, and ran straight into the flames. "Adam!" Emma screamed. "Don't!" The heat hit like a wall. Smoke burned my lungs. The old wooden beams cracked overhead. I could barely see. The frightened horses kicked wildly inside their stalls. I grabbed the nearest rope, cut it loose, then another. One by one. The terrified animals bolted toward the open door. A loud crash echoed behind me. Part of the roof collapsed. For one terrifying second, and I thought I wasn't getting out. Then a strong hand grabbed my arm. George. Together, we stumbled through the smoke just as another section of the roof crashed behind us. The entire crowd erupted in relieved cheers. Emma ran toward us without saying a word. She wrapped her arms around me. For several long seconds, she refused to let go. Tears streamed down her face. "You could have died," she whispered. I looked into her eyes. "So could your family." Nothing else needed to be said. For the first time since she'd learned the truth, she didn't step away. The fire department quickly brought the blaze under control. Fortunately, the house was untouched. The horses survived. No one was seriously injured. Then one of the deputies approached, carrying a tablet. "We found something." Security footage from a nearby gas station showed 2 pickup trucks filling fuel cans less than an hour before the fire. The license plate traced back to a construction company, a company recently hired by Brian Walker. The sheriff didn't waste time. An hour later, Brian was sitting inside an interrogation room. "I had nothing to do with it," he insisted. The investigator slid photographs across the table. Phone records, bank transfers, surveillance footage, statements from the men he'd hired. One by one, every denial collapsed. Finally, Brian lowered his head. "I only wanted Adam gone," he whispered. "I never wanted anyone hurt." The sheriff closed the file. Intent doesn't erase consequences. Brian was arrested before sunrise. A few days later, the farm slowly returned to normal. Neighbors helped rebuild the barn. Local businesses donated lumber. Volunteers repaired fences. No one asked who paid for the new equipment. Because no one knew. The invoices had already been settled anonymously. George looked toward me one afternoon. "You still doing that?" I smiled. "I don't know what you're talking about." He laughed. "I've known for days." That evening, Emma asked if we could walk to the old oak tree overlooking the fields, the same place where we'd watch sunsets together. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I was angry. "I know. I still hate that you lied." "I know. But..." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "When everything fell apart, you never stopped choosing us. You never tried to buy forgiveness. You earned it." I closed my eyes for a second. Those words meant more than every award I'd ever received. "I can't promise. I'll never make mistakes again," I said quietly. "But I can promise I'll never build another relationship on secrets." Emma smiled through her tears. "I believe you." For the first time, she reached for my hand. Not because I was a billionaire. Not because I'd saved the farm. Because trust had finally begun to grow back. 6 months later, the rebuilt barn stood stronger than before. The entire town gathered beneath strings of white lights. George walked Emma down the aisle. Lucy proudly carried the flowers. When Emma reached me, she laughed softly. "You clean up pretty well." I smiled. "So do you." The minister looked between us. "Adam Collins, do you promise to build this marriage on honesty, not appearances?" "I do." "Emma Parker, do you promise to stand beside him through every season of life?" She squeezed my hand. "I do." "You may kiss your bride." Applause echoed across the fields. George wiped away a tear. Lucy cheered louder than anyone else. A year later, an old warehouse outside town reopened with a new sign above the entrance. The Second Chance Foundation. Inside, families received groceries. Homeless veterans found temporary housing. Young entrepreneurs received small business grants. Everything was funded quietly. without giant portraits, without Adam Collins' name covering the walls. At the entrance, one simple plaque read, "Real wealth is measured by the lives you lift, not the fortune you keep." Emma smiled as children ran through the community garden. "Remember the first day we met?" she asked. I laughed. I was sitting beside the road, then hoping someone would notice me. She squeezed my hand. "And a little girl offered you half her lunch." I looked across the courtyard. Lucy, a little older now, was teaching another child how to plant tomatoes beside George. I smiled. I left New York searching for someone who could love me without knowing I was rich. Emma rested her head against my shoulder. "And what did you find?" I looked at the family standing only a few steps away. George, Lucy, Emma, a community that had changed me long before I changed it. I found something far more valuable than love. What? A place where I never had to pretend to be anyone else. Emma kissed my cheek. "Welcome home." For the first time in my life, those 2 words meant more than every dollar I'd ever earned.